Hi, good evening, everyone. Welcome to our class. And been beautiful weather the last few days as opposed to a week or so, and it was hard to even get out and get around. But kind of make me think about spring, but I'm sure we'll get hit one more time before we get back in the bad weather. Have some announcements before we end tonight and in our prayer request too. So I'll save those for the end, but just some things that we'll be mentioning happenings around, and also some people that are on our list. Tonight we are continuing with our series, 7 Habits of Highly Effective Christians, and we're on habit 4, which is think win-win. And last week, I always want to go back and review what we did the week before. Last week was lesson 4, was habit number 3, but put first things first. And 3 things we mentioned in putting first things first. Number 1 is that we should decide what matters most, set our priorities. And then number 2 is we should determine not to get distracted from those priorities once we set them, maintain our focus on what's important. And then number 3, dedicate ourselves to living that life based on those priorities, and then live it daily, day by day. So that was kind of what we talked about last week. Now that kind of ended our first part of our lessons. We said these 7 habits are divided up into really 3 parts. The first 3 have to do with personal things, with private victories, we call them, is things that we need to get right in ourselves before we can move on. Tonight we will begin the next section, which deals with our relationships with other people. And these are what the author in the book titles public victories. So we're still dealing with us. How do we deal with other people? So that's kind of where we're going with it tonight. But so let's get into our lesson. Lesson 4, lesson 5, habit 4, think win-win. The little bit of history of that. Remember, this book that we're kind of loosely basing it on was a business leadership type book, and this win-win idea goes back to a research project that was conducted at Harvard University Business School back in the 70s. And in the course of this, what they were studying, they call it the Harvard Negotiation Project. But they were looking at examining and optimizing ways to negotiate deals in business. And some of y'all may have a business background. That's not mine. But you know, the result of that project, they came up with what was called the win-win strategy, or sometimes called the double win concept. And it focused on proper negotiation tactics where both parties could achieve a victory or a profit when they reached an agreement. So this is the conditions they said need to be met for this, in order for this to happen when it comes to businesses, which we're applying it to relationships with other people, particularly in our Christian life. But number 1, both parties are able to adapt the perspective of the other party. So you see from the other person's point of view. Too many times we see where we are, saying where you stand depends on where you sit. What affects me. That's how I tend to see things. So we need to be able to be empathetic, look how the other person sees things. Number 2, both parties not only have to have their individual advantage, but the advantage of the other party in mind. So I'm not just looking at how can I win, but how can I help the other person be successful too. Number 3, both parties know it's not about winning and losing, but about winning and winning. So you go into the negotiation thinking, how can we do this? Number 4, both parties know it's not about the position of the strongest, but about the advantage of cooperation that both sides want. Sometime in business, and I have been this before, but as a school administrator, I dealt with fairly big budgets and things that we dealt with, particularly when I was here at Muscle Shoals at a bigger school. I think the budget we dealt with, when you have to do a yearly budget, was it was around $500,000 for the school. So it was a lot of money to keep up with and know where everything was going and what was in the budget. So, when you do that, sometimes when we did negotiation for contracts on certain services, stuff that the school had, we would do a consortium where we weren't big enough, especially when I was in smaller school systems, where you weren't big enough to maybe strike a deal, but you could go in with another system maybe and other schools together, maybe in a county system, and you could work a deal where everybody could benefit and get a better deal, on copier or vending or whatever you were doing. So, that's kind of what they're talking about here. And then number 5, both parties know that you're mutually responsible for the interests of the other party. So with those in mind, as far as how that affects us in business, think about how that would affect us as Christians in our relationship with other people. The advantages of these are, number one, you have a basis for building a trustful relationship where we trust each other. We're not leery of each other, that we're going to try to I'm trying to mess you up. I'm trying to undercut you. And then number two, it's an opportunity for further business in the future. So if we can set those deals where, now we got a partnership and we can deal with things moving forward. So business-wise, that's what it's talking about. In reality, though, thinking win-win is just an attitude toward life, okay? And it's a mental frame of mind where it says, I can win and so can you. It's not about me. It's not about you. It's about both of us. So kind of a foundation for getting along with others begins with a belief that we're all equal. We were talking about this at school today with one of our history teachers, when they had the kids were talking about the Constitution, it says all men are created equal and now they're uncertain, unalienable rights. So when they wrote that, at the time it was written, they really didn't mean that. They meant all white men are created equal, not Native Americans, not the slaves, whatever. And then especially some places, if you're a landholder, you were equal. So they expanded that a little bit. We've changed that, but that was, the belief is we're all equal. I'm not better than you. You're not better than me, but we're on, for the cross, we're all the same anyway. The Bible says there be no male, no female, no rich, no poor, no slave, no master. Everybody's the same. So as we look at this, we're going to approach it with that the best way to understand what win-win is to see what win-win is not. So we're going to look at some other scenarios that are common in the world, especially in business world probably, but just in daily life, which are win-lose, lose-lose, and lose-win. These are unfortunately kind of common, but they're also not exactly the attitude you want to have when you're dealing with people. So the first one, win-lose. Win-lose, he calls it the totem pole. You know what a totem pole is? Got all those little carvings on that pole, one stacked on top of the other. So I'm at the top, you're underneath me, on down the system. And in a lot of countries, a lot of societies, that's how it is. There's a caste system where if you're born rich, you're rich. If you're born poor, that's where you're going to end. There is no moving back and forth. I know India and some other countries in the past have been that way. But in our country, that's what makes America great, the fact that you can be born poor, and if you're willing to work hard, take advantage of the opportunities this country gives you, get an education, work hard in your job, whatever, you have a chance to advance and move up in the world. So, that totem pole really is not how we think about things, but sometimes it is how we think about things. But basically it says, this attitude, it says the pie of success is only so big. It's called the scarcity mentality. Like there's only so much up there, and if you get a big piece, then that means there's less for me. All right, so that lose-win, win-lose. Like if you're winning, then I'm losing. Win-lose is competitive, it's prideful, it's selfish, and it's not the way we need to proceed. C.S. Lewis wrote, pride gets no pleasure out of having something, only out of having more than the next man. It's that comparison that makes you proud, the pleasure of being above the rest. And win-lose wears a lot of faces, and we'll talk about some of these briefly. One way is when people use other people emotionally or physically for their own purposes. We've known people who do that. We've seen situations like that. I used to work with a guy at one point when I was an assistant coach, and very good football coach. He knew football, but he, I don't know, he was warped somewhere in his upbringing. But he would do anything for you if it benefited him. And same thing, he's that way with the kids. We had some kids on that team who really were capable of getting a college scholarship. If they helped him win the championship that year, he was all about it. But at the end of the season, he didn't have anything for them. So most of the assistants to the principal ended up helping a lot of those kids get a scholarship. He didn't have anything to do with it. But that was his attitude. Number two, sometimes we spread rumors about people trying to bring them down. Some people say, well, I can't raise up, then I'm going to bring you down. Unfortunately, we see that from time to time. That's that win-lose attitude. If you're winning, then I must be losing. Jealousy. Always insisting on getting your way without concern for the feelings of others. That's selfishness. What's in it for me? I don't care what you want, what I want. That's what matters. And then the last one, becoming jealous when something good happens to somebody else. both of us do it, but instead of me being proud for you if you accomplish something, I feel bad, like I've been slighted that you got something good. An example of this that I can think of, past few years, it's been 20 years ago now, but most of y'all probably remember this coming out in the news. Hopefully it didn't affect you. But the Enron Scandal back in around 2000, 2001. Enron was a huge company. They were a energy services and commodities type company. They were one of the top 5 companies in the whole country, probably the world at that time. In around 2000, statistics said they had 200,000 employees, and they dealt with about $101 billion in their business. So a huge, huge company, and people invested in them. And when they crashed, when they went under, a lot of people lost all their investment. A lot of people, their retirement had been through them, and it ruined a lot of people's lives, and it all because of the attitude of the leadership of that company. And if you don't remember that exactly how that happened, their leaders at that time, they skyrocketed. They went up really, really quick. And part of that was the way that they did things. Their leadership believed that their philosophy was that 2 things motivate people. That's money and fear. So they used those 2 things to motivate their employees, especially their executives. And they called it the rank and yank. So either where you ranked or you got yanked. So every quarter they had these goals that had to be met. And then they ranked all their employees on how well they did on those metrics where they measured them, that analysis. And if you're at the top, you got huge bonuses, millions of dollars sometimes in bonus. If you were the bottom 20%, you got fired, no matter what. It didn't matter if you had done really good. They didn't look at what you had done. It's just where did you rank? And if you ranked at the bottom, you got fired. So what that did was foster a culture in that company where it was cutthroat. Because if I'm at the bottom, I'm gonna lose my job, and also greed because I'm at the top. I'm making it big. So it led to unscrupulous practices of accounting that was not correct, where they were lying about what their profits were and how they were doing that, which eventually made the company fail. And then that competition between employees, where it was, I can't be proud for you because you're doing good, because I'm gonna get fired. I'm gonna lose my job. So that was a toxic culture that you don't want to build. You want teamwork where everybody's working to help each other to build the company up. But that idea they had there eventually led to the collapse of that huge company, and several of the top executives going to jail. And like I said, a lot of people losing a ton of money in their stocks they had in that company. That we see that also in a lesser example. Sometimes in sports, I know Shaquille O'Neal. Everybody knows who Shaquille O'Neal is. Probably a huge basketball player. Played from LSU. Played for the Lakers. But when he was playing, he had been there for a little while. And they told a story about Kobe Bryant when he came in. Kobe was the young gun, real talented, brash, real prideful. And he said that first year he was there, he's like, he got the ball, he was shooting it. I don't care. I'm not passing it to anybody else. I'm going to score. I'm getting my points, And since the other players told Shaq, you've been here for a while. You're kind of the leader of the team. So will you go talk to Kobe and tell him, we need to play a little bit more team ball? He said, so I went and talked to him, and I said, hey, Kobe, there's no I in team. He said, you're right. He said, but there's me in there. He said, and I'm getting my shots first. He said, if y'all want to score, get a rebound. So he said, that's how he was. So that he was a great player, but not maybe so much of a great teammate. So are we in it for the team, or are we in it for us? Also, along with this win-lose situation, sometimes you can get into a situation where it is a lose-lose. If you get 2 people with that win-lose attitude together, sometimes they are so at each other that it ends up in a lose-lose, where I don't care if I have to lose. If you're going to lose, I'll do that. Okay. Stories told about a guy who was getting a divorce, and the lawyer came to him, and the court ruled, and he said, you've got to sell all your assets and split them 50-50. So he was mad. So what he did was he sold his assets for next to nothing. So he had a car that was like worth $20,000 or whatever. He sold it for $100 and gave his wife $50. He said, "There you go." You know, he took a big loss just so he was willing to lose just so she would lose. You know, so you get two people who are butting heads like it's all about me. That's not a good situation. That little phrase, you know, cutting off your nose to spite your face, that kind of comes to mind there. Unfortunately, some people kind of can take this, not that severe, but I have saw people take this attitude when it comes to Bible discussion. You know, when we're trying to teach somebody, it turns into a competition where, you know, I'm not trying to convert you. I'm trying to prove to you that I'm smarter than you are, or I'm right and you're wrong. And that we have to be careful about that attitude as we try to convert people. Is what we should be doing when we're having a Bible discussion. Story of that comes to mind personally that I was involved with. A friend of mine who was a great guy, very knowledgeable of the Bible, but we were on a business trip one time for school, and he and I, and there was two other gentlemen there with us, and we had been to the conference, whatever, been to eat. We were riding back, and me and my friend were in the back, and the two were in front, and they came across a Bible question, and I think it was premillennialism or something. They said something about the rapture or something, and when they did, he was in attack mode. You know, that he was just started firing. You know, that's not right, and not just trying to teach them, but it's like, I mean, he was angry. And I was like, settle down. You know, we've lost the opportunity to teach anybody when we go into that attitude. So, as we deal with people sometimes, and we have an opportunity, we need to remember Ephesians 4:15, which says speaking the truth in love. You know, and I think maybe, you know, the church gets a bad name sometimes, and I think in the past more than now that we've been where maybe we kind of had that attitude sometimes that you know, where we're right, we kind of came across too hard. I'm not saying we don't preach the truth and stand by it, but there's a way of going about doing that. Okay, you do it in love, and I'm trying to help you. I'm trying to teach you. You know, I'm not trying to say, you know, I'm right and you're wrong. So we have to be careful with that. Our next one is the lose-win, and the book calls that the doormat. And they present that in a bad way. For the world, that lose-win is dangerous because they say it can really be bad, and it can, but it depends on your mindset. If you have that attitude that I'm less than you are, you know, wipe your feet on me, everybody else does, and I constantly and I always give in to you, where I'm just going to lose and let you win. That's not a good thing. You see, sometimes maybe in a relationship, maybe where one member of a husband and wife is a member of the church, and the other one's not, and you know, instead of trying to convert them, to avoid a fight, sometimes they'll just go along. So that's that lose-win situation. Saw that too many times. So that can be with a coworker, can be with a friend, can be with a family member. But the problem with that is over time you keep giving in until eventually you build up resentment. And then that resentment explodes one day, and then it's not good. So, you know, there's a way of doing that where we don't do that. So we said that's how the world looks at it. But what about as Christians? Well, as Christians, really a lose-win is not necessarily a bad thing if you look at it and how you approach it. So we're going to kind of blend this lose-win into the next one, which is the win-win, is the main topic of our discussion tonight. But, you know, as a Christian, what does it mean to win? As Christians, we need to develop that authentic Bible understanding of what it means to win. Winning in God's eyes may look like losing to the rest of the world. To understand the centrality of this faith of the thought, simply consider Jesus on the cross and ask, who won that day? So Jesus lost in the world's eyes. You know, he didn't stand up for himself. You know, he is a sheep done before it's the slaughter. You know, they asked him to defend himself. He refused. He could have called down 10,000 angels. He didn't have to stay on the cross. The nails didn't hold him there. Okay, he gave in and lost that day, but with the knowledge that actually I'm winning in the end, and that loss was for us to win. So, you know, what is losing and what is winning? A lot of times God lays out those opportunities for us, And I think we have to be on the lookout for those. We talked about that in our last lesson, about that reticular activation system in our brain that's there, where when you have that turned on, you see things and that you normally wouldn't notice, but now you're noticing them. And we made the point, like if you bought a certain model and color of a car, you never noticed those before until you bought one, then you see them everywhere. You know, that's causing your brain now is sensing that. It's turned on to that. The light switches for that. So we have to be looking for those opportunities. So if we look for those opportunities where we can teach people, sometimes we may have to give a little. Not, like I said, not that we compromise the truth, but in the way that we approach it sometimes, and we're patient with them. Y'all read the book Muscle and a Shovel? It was real popular back a few years ago. I've taught a class on that before. That guy was a great example of that. He was very patient with his coworker that story was about. He was willing to not push sometimes and maybe look like he was losing sometimes, but in the end he was gaining and winning his soul. So that's what we're looking for here. We build that trust, and we learn to trust God. That, hey, I understand that things may not look real like we're going just now, but I think, in the end you're going to make this work out for me. One story about this is a worldly example, but a guy who was willing to give a little so he could gain. But this fellow said he had started up a computer software company, and he was beginning his business, and every contract was important. But he had signed a contract with this bank to do their I don't know, some of their internet part of it anyway. But the president of the bank at that time was all on board. He wanted to do it, and the employees were a little hesitant about it. So right after they signed the contract, they changed bank presidents. So the new president came in, and he came to him. He said, "Look, I know I signed a contract." He said, "I just don't know if the time is right really for me to be making this move." He said, "My employees are not really excited about it, and I'm coming in new." He said, I'd really rather not. He said, "Would you consider?" And the guy said, "I could take a hard stance. I had a signed contract, and it was for $84,000. And he said, "That's a lot of money for me starting my business." He said, "But I thought about it." And he said, "Tell you what," he said, I don't want you to be in this relationship and not be comfortable with it." He said, "So I'll null and void the contract." So he tore up the contract. He said, "But if you ever have any needs, please consider us in the future." So it was just a few months later, the guy came back, and he says, I'm needing some software to do another part of our business. He said, and I really appreciated how you do things and how ethical you were. He said, "I'd like for you to bid on the contract." And he did, and he got the contract. The new contract was worth $284,000. So by being willing to take a little bit seemed a loss at the time, he was able to gain in the end, which is how we'd have to deal sometimes with people. Sometimes we have to be willing to put ourselves second so that we can advance in the future, especially when it comes to opportunities about teaching people. Maybe we'd like to, like my friend that day, just pounce, and we see an obvious error. But if we're patient and we let that thing play out and we build some trust like the guy did in Muscle and a Shovel, then we have that opportunity we can teach them, and when we build the relationship, well, that's possible. So our last point is win-win. Now the first one says the totem pole. The next one is the doormat. He calls this one the all-you-can-eat buffet, okay? It's nigh to my heart. I love all-you-can-eat buffets, okay? I'm big on stories. I'll tell you a quick story on that one. It has nothing to do with the lesson, just about buffets. But my wife has a cousin, and about our age, but her husband's a big old guy, and big fella. But him and several couples they were friends with, they used to get together and ride motorcycles. And they would just, take a day trip, ride and enjoy the weather and stop and eat somewhere. But so they were on one of their trips, and they came to this Chinese restaurant, and it was all-you-could-eat buffet sign out front. And so him and all of his friends were big guys. There's about 5 or 6 of them. And said they go in, they get the all-you-can-eat buffet, and said, man, they are pigging out. And just keep eating. He says, finally, the little Chinese guy that owns the restaurant, he says he's had enough. So he comes out and he says, "Hey, fat boy," he said, "sign says all you can eat, not can you eat all." So sometimes we have to limit, take into account what all you can eat is. I have to do that sometimes. If it says all you can eat, I take that as a challenge sometimes. It's how much can I eat? Okay? But the win-win, the incorrect definition of that, and this is if you ever read the Urban Dictionary, not a good one, but anyway, they just find it as a situation where I win twice and you lose both times. That's not what win-win means, okay? And he says the example of that is like, okay, you agree to buy my meal and I get the change. That's a win-win, okay? I get the food and the change back from it. And probably your kids, you do that sometimes. Some of my kids, I remember if you ever gave them a 20, it didn't matter what they were buying, you weren't seeing any change. It was gone, So that's kind of the win-win he's talking about. But really, what we really think about is much different than that. A lot of people in our world, they think of terms of either or. Either you win or you lose. Either you're tough or you're soft. In business, a lot of people say, you got to be tough, or that's just business. We don't turn off our Christianity when we're involved in business. If you don't treat your people in business the same way you treat them if they were a church member, then you're in trouble. That's not good. A story about that, I was talking to a fellow a few days ago, and he was he actually, some of y'all may know him, Jeff Goff. It's a Maywood Christian Camp, but Jeff helps with in his role there. He works with the school a lot, but he had helped with Hamilton with basketball and run the clock and different things. And we were at Men's Day 2 or 3 weeks ago, and he saw this guy there, and his name is Randy Brown. He said, "Who is that guy right over there?" And I said, "That's Randy Brown. He goes to church here. So he's been a friend of mine for a long time." He said, "Didn't he used to be a basketball official?" And I said, "Yeah, he did." He said, "I thought so." He said, "One night of the game, I really didn't like his officiating, but I didn't say anything. I really didn't raise a fuss." He said, "And I'm glad because I saw him like the next week at church." And I thought, man, I'm glad I didn't really just, go off on you for officiating, So, treat people the same wherever we are. But that win-win says that we're both, to do this, you have to be nice and tough. Okay, kind of what we were talking about a while ago with the discussion. It's a balance between courage and consideration. So I have the courage to stand up for what's right, but I also have the consideration for the other person's feelings. And like we first read about what that Harvard project meant was that you put yourself in the other person's place. You can empathize with them. So as I'm studying with somebody, or as I'm approaching somebody about coming to church or whatever, or setting up a Bible study, I put myself in their place, okay? What if I wasn't raised in the church? What if I don't know the truth? What is my, how would I look at it? How would I feel? So you try to see where they are. But you still have the courage to stand up for what's right. He says there's 3 vital characteristics that are essential. Number 1, integrity. Sticking up for your true values, belief, and commitments. Number 2, maturity. Expressing your ideas and feelings with courage and consideration for the feelings and ideas of the other person. And then number 3 is that abundance mentality. We talked about the scarcity mentality. That there's, you get yours and there's not enough left for me. The abundance mentality says there's plenty for everybody. It's kind of like loving your kids. When you have that first kid, mine's sitting over here, all right. When you have that first one, you think, man, I can never love anybody else as much as I love that one. Then you have another child. You don't divide your love. It multiplies, okay? So I don't love her any less because her sister came along. I loved both of them as much, so I had twice as much love to give. So that abundance mentality is there's plenty. That's the win-win. It's a belief that everyone can win. There's plenty of success for anybody. And if we look in Acts chapter 17 there, verses 19 through 34, I think Paul's lesson, the famous sermon he did on Mars Hill in Athens, is a great example of that. Sometimes Paul would come in kind of hot, and he would come in heavy, and depending on the situation. But in this situation, he had been speaking in Athens there, and the Greeks were all about learning. We're famous. We study them even today, the Greeks, and how philosophy and how that kind of changed the world. But it says they were all about learning something new. So when they heard Paul, they brought him in, and they said, "No, we want to hear more about this strange, lesson, this strange God you're talking about." And so Paul, kind of seeing where they were, says, "And they took him, brought him to the Areopagus, saying, May we know what this new teaching is which you're proclaiming." So Paul had been, and he had saw all the idols. They were everywhere. and they even had one to the unknown God. So that's where he started, okay? And he didn't insult him. He said, so Paul stood in the midst of the Areopagus and said, men of Athens, I see that you are very religious in all aspects. So that was the beginning of his speech, was he put himself in their place, and he didn't come down hard on them and tell them they were wrong. He said, okay, I see that y'all are very religious. You know, you worship all these gods. You even have one to the one you don't know. I'm here to tell you about him. Okay, so he took advantage of that, tried to build a relationship with them, a win-win, so that he could preach to them and get something across to them. He says, therefore, what you worship in ignorance, this I proclaim to you. And at the end of that, on verse 33, 34, it says, but some men joined him and believed. Now, a lot of them just said, this guy's crazy, and they walked away. Okay, so especially when you start talking about the resurrection, there's like, once you're dead, you're dead. You know, they didn't believe that. But some of them did believe. So he was able to convert several people from that speech. Not everybody, not going to get them all, but he was successful in getting his message across, and he took advantage of that opportunity. Another thing of that is teamwork. The Bible says a lot about working as a team. It talks about as members of the church, we're all members of the body and all have our own job to do. You know, not because I'm the foot and not the hand or the head or that's important. Everybody has a job to do. We all have to do our job. In a successful team, teammates want more. They value what's best for the team when they do themselves. Not like Shaq and Kobe were talking about a while ago. Okay, for a good team, everybody has to be willing to put their own personal glory aside and do what's best for the team. In the end, though, they realize that I may lose a little, but I'm going to win a whole lot more. Pro sports especially, most of them, they have these big contracts, and I don't know if you know how most of those are structured, but, it's not just they write you a check. It may say it's worth $10 million. Some of that may be some upfront money, signing bonus. You also get paid by every game you play, and if you don't play that, you don't admit that week. So if it was a 16-game season, I'm supposed to make $1 million a week, or in the contract, I don't play, I don't get that check. The other thing is most of them are heavy with incentive laden. So if the team wins, if you make it to the championship or whatever, you're going to get more. But even a lot of these college football coaches are that way. If they make it to a bowl game or they win the conference or they play a national championship, all that's worth another big check. So it's all about the not just me, but it's about all of us win together. If we all win, we win. Bible says there in Philippians 2, chapter 4, kind of what all of this whole thing is built on. If you had to say one verse we're going to study tonight, this is it. Do not merely look out for your own personal interests, but also for the interests of others. So as we do things, everything should be with not just what's best for me, but what's good for you too. How can we both win? Talking to athletics, a lot of coaches used to, it's not as probably used to be, but they refuse to put names on the back of jerseys. I remember Bear Bryant at Alabama. I'm a big Alabama fan. So for years, he would not put their name on the back of the jerseys. I remember it was way on into his career before he finally did that. But they believed that was promoted individuality. It's all about me. And coaches have this thing, and they still say it. If it's got to be about the name on the front of the jersey, not what's on the back. In other words, if it says Muscle Shoals or Mars Hill or whatever on the front, Alabama, Auburn, that's what I'm playing for, this name, not that name. Not my name, but the team name. So that teamwork approach is important. I know Mia Hamm is a big female soccer player in the United States. She had a great quote that's out there. I'm not a huge soccer person, but I love your quote. She says, I'm a member of a team. I rely on the team. I defer to it and sacrifice for it. Because the team, not the individual, is the ultimate champion. So she understood that it's not about what I do. It's about the other one. I was coaching basketball. I was coaching the younger ones when I first started. And I had a kid come over one night and we got beat. He wanted to see the scorebook. He wanted to know how many points he had. And I said, it doesn't matter how many points you had. I don't care if you scored 20. The other team scored more than we did. That's all that matters. Okay? So try to reinforce that with your young ones especially. It's about the team. It's not about you. Okay? I tell a story all the time. I was not very much of a basketball player. I said my triple-double, I didn't get 10 points, 10 rebounds, and 10 blocks. My triple-double was I played 2 minutes and had 2 fouls and 2 turnovers, so that was my triple-double. I was not a very good basketball player. So I never did want, when I played, I didn't want to check the stats because I knew mine weren't very good, okay? But it has to be about what the team is. A great story about this is that there was an anthropologist who was studying the cultures of this remote tribe in Africa several years ago. And he was living with the tribe, seeing how they thought, how they did things, their culture, religion, all that. So he did a little experiment. And he took a basket of candy and he put it down underneath a big tree. And he took all the kids from the tribe. There were probably 20 of them or so, he said. And he walked back a good ways and he drew a line in the dirt. He said, now y'all line up right here and run as fast you can to that basket of candy. And whoever gets there first can have the whole basket to yourself. So he said it shocked him. When he said go, instead of them racing and running over each other, they all held hands and they skipped over there. They got to the basket, they sat down in a circle, and they shared the candy. It was not a competition. And he says, why did y'all do that? And one little girl says, how can I be happy if all the others are sad? She understood it was about the group. And as Christians, that's how we should be. You know, it doesn't matter if I'm getting the praise. What's good for the whole group? What's good for the congregation? The South Africans have a saying. This is something from Desmond Tutu. It's called Ubuntu, U-B-U-N-T-A. A little saying they have, a little word. And basically it means I am because we are. So in other words, I am what I am because of what the community is, of what everybody is. And I guess in a culture, society like that where, you know, possessions are not that big of a thing, where if you don't have anything, it's no big deal. And when you live where it's kind of hand to mouth every day, you know, we're told to pray, give us this day our daily bread. When you live in a situation like that where you have to depend on each other to survive, as everybody in the village has to be working together, or you don't make it, you come to understand those things. I think in our society maybe we've gotten away from that, where we do think it's about us. You know, even the Native Americans, when white people first came to this country hundreds of years ago, and they wanted to buy their land or whatever, they couldn't grasp that. So what do you mean buy the land? Nobody owns the land. It's everybody's land. So they couldn't grasp that concept. So that's kind of how these kids were. It's like it's not a competition. It's not mine. It's ours. You know. So as Christians, I think that's something we should have. Some other examples, kind of how that works. We'll end up with a few. We're about out of time, but you know, the Roman army. We read about how they fought. The Roman soldiers were well trained, well equipped. You know, we read in the Bible where he talks about likens the Christian faith to how we live as a Christian to how the Roman soldier was equipped. You know, with the sword and the shield and the breastplate and the helmet and all those different kind of things. But what really made them a formidable fighting force was the fact that they fought together. And one of the biggest things they had was they had a thing, in English it translates to the tortoise. And they had those big, tall shields set up, you know, almost half as big as them. And when they would go into battle, they would get in formation. They would put those shields interlocking across the front. And then others down the side. And then others would get behind them and hold them over the top. So it was like they were in a tank. And this is when you fought with swords and arrows and spears. So then they would just march forward. So as long as you all stayed in place, if nobody got out of step, you couldn't hardly beat them. Now, if one person let it down and they let the team down and they created a gap, then the enemy could get in. But that tortoise fighting formation was really what made the Roman army so good. But they recognize every man depends on every other man for our survival here. And then NASA, the Apollo mission, and we put the first man on the moon was Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong when they went. Was a big deal. We still know their names. But they said over and over, it was not just us. There's about 300,000 men and women working for NASA, and without all of them, we couldn't have got there. It wouldn't have happened. A great story of that is that in 1962, which that happened in 1969, I'm to the age I remember that. That was a big deal as a kid, getting to see the man land on the moon. I had a little model of the the lunar lander and all those kind of stuff. I remember those things. But President Kennedy went to NASA headquarters in 1962 for a visit, and he said as he was walking around, he came across this custodian. It was a janitor, and he was mopping the floor. And he came up to him and he said, "Hey, sir, how you doing?" He said, "Doing great." So he just had this infectious attitude. And he said, "What are you doing?" He said, "I'm helping put a man on the moon. You know, I may be the janitor, and all I'm doing is mopping the floor and keeping the building clean so these scientists can do their work, but I'm part of the team, you know. That's what I do. I'm part of it." Personal example of that, my middle daughter, she works for NASA as a contract company, and she's not a aerospace engineer. She's an English major and a writing major and a communications specialist. And when she went the first time, they had their big meeting of all the new employees. She said, "I was late getting there. They had us meet in this restaurant." And she said all these other young people that was there, and they had a list of everybody who they were, and said they was all like, who's this English person? What are they doing? She said, so I had to explain what my job was and what my part was in making all this work. And she said after I did, they said, oh, you're very important, you know. So everybody has a part, and as Christians, we have to see that we're all part of the body, whether we're the head or the eye or the hand or whatever that job is, it's important. And we have to look at that win-win situation in whatever we're involved in, is that if we don't think that way, you know, if we don't think win-win, where if I win and you win both, then nobody wins. And if you think about it, what habit could be more Christian than that? Because the example of Christ, he was about everybody else winning, you know. Was the last thing he did for his apostles before he died. He washed their feet. Servant. He was a servant leader. You know, I didn't come here to be king. I came here as a servant to help you. So he set that example for us that lose. Sometimes you have to look like you're losing to the world to win. He looked like that, and sometimes that's how we are. But we overtake the world not through power, not through force. You know, Peter wanted to pull out his sword and fight that night when he got arrested. He said, "That's not it. That's not how this goes down. Put the ear back on," you know. So we have to recognize how we're supposed to do this. So quick summary. Think win-win. Gave a definition. Says it's a frame of mind, not you or me, but it's both. We talked about win-lose. It's that scarcity mentality. That's not it. We talked about the lose-win. That can result in resentment. But if we do it the right way, then that lose-win is really a win-win, which was our last point. And that abundance mentality, which is we all win. If I win, we all win. Okay. So hopefully we got something out of our lesson tonight that we can take with you. Like I said, those first three were about personal things to us, private victories. These next three will be about our dealings with other people and how we relate to them, which was what tonight started. On our announcements, I want us to announce that Super Bowl party this Sunday, February the 13th, in the multipurpose room, immediately following evening Bible class. It says the elders will be providing crawfish and shrimp boil with corn, taters, sausage, wings, pork loin, etc. Please bring desserts, drinks, and appetizers. Sounds pretty good. I love a crawfish boil. Okay, so if you want to participate in that, I encourage you to do that. Also, we have several on our prayer list, special prayer requests, and those are in the bulletin today. One to add to those. The family of Jerry Lane, he had passed away the last few days, so please remember them in our prayers. I mentioned my wife. You know, we all had COVID again and gotten over it. She is her immune system is not that good, so she had been a lot better. She was back at church Sunday for the first time in a long time, but she has kind of had a little bit of a setback. She wasn't able to be here tonight, not feeling too good. So please, we pray for everybody else. Please keep her in your prayers this week also. And I'd mentioned Mark Posey, who was our preacher at Winfield when I was there. He's in the Ukraine on a mission trip, and dangerous place to be at this time. So please remember him in your weekly prayers too. If you will, bow with us, and we'll end with a prayer. Father, we thank you for today. Thank you for the beautiful weather you've given us. Thank you for the country we live in, for the opportunities we have to come out to study another lesson from thy word without any fear of harm or molestation anyway. Pray that you'd be with us, that we would take those things, that we'd be open to those ideas, and we could apply them to our lives and make us better servants of thine, and we get along and to have increase our opportunities to talk with other people and broaden the borders of the kingdom. Pray that you be those who are sick, have many on our list, many dealing with different things and ailments. Pray that you be with them, the ones that care for them. Pray that you be the ones who are lost loved ones, especially the Jerry Lane family at this time, that you'd be with them and in their time of bereavement. Pray that you'd be with all of us. We know we've seen every day we fall short of the glory. Pray that you would forgive us those things as we ask forgiveness, and finally save us in heaven is our prayer in Christ's name. Amen. Thank y'all for being here.